Welcome back to Central Colorado Ballistics. My name is Wally. In 2004, a federal gun ban expired, and something unusual happened. Nothing replaced it. No new national bans, no sweeping federal reforms. Not because the debate ended, but because the battlefield changed. When the 1994 assault weapons ban expired in 2004, Congress had a choice. Renew it, replace it, or walk away. They walked away. Not for a lack of proposals. Bills were introduced. Hearings were held. Studies were cited. But none crossed the finish line. For the first time since 1934, federal gun regulation stalled. And that stall created a vacuum. When Congress stops passing laws, power doesn't disappear. It moves. In the years after 2004, federal gun policy shifted toward agency rulemaking, administrative interpretation, and enforcement priorities. The ATF began redefining terms. What counts as manufacturing? What counts as a firearm? What counts as a receiver? These weren't new laws. They were new interpretations. And interpretations don't go to Congress. They go to courts. For decades, the Supreme Court avoided the Second Amendment. Then, in 2008, that changed. District of Columbia versus Heller. Heller answered one question clearly. The Second Amendment protects an individual right, not tied to militia service, not dependent on government approval. But Heller was narrow. It didn't strike down all gun laws. It didn't define every boundary. It simply said, there are boundaries. 2 years later, McDonald versus Chicago extended that ruling to the states. The Second Amendment now applied everywhere. And then the court went quiet again. For over a decade, lower courts filled the gap. They used balancing tests, interest tests, public safety justifications. And almost every law survived. In 2022, the silence ended. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. Bruen didn't just strike down a law. It rewrote the test. No more interest balancing. No more modern policy arguments. The question became simple. Is this regulation consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation? If not, it fails. After Bruen, something remarkable happened. Laws started falling. Carry restrictions. Sensitive place expansions. Licensing schemes. Not everywhere, not all at once. But the pattern was clear. The federal government wasn't passing new laws. The courts were dismantling old ones. This is why today feels different. National gun policy is mostly frozen. What exists is being tested, not expanded. But states didn't freeze. They inherited the old frameworks, old assumptions, old fears, and they adapted them. Colorado didn't invent modern gun laws. It adopted and reshaped ideas that already existed. And that's why how we tell this story matters. One thing I want to be clear about before we move on. This series wasn't about politics. It wasn't about parties. It was about structure. What laws were passed? How power moved? And what changed because of it? Whether someone supports or opposes these laws, the timeline still matters. If you step back far enough, a pattern appears. A crisis. A response. And a law. Then time passes. The justification fades. But the law remains. Until the court finally asked the question, Congress avoided. So this is where the national story pauses. From here on out, change happens in courtrooms and state houses. But to understand why states act the way they do, we have to go back. Before modern laws. Before statehood. before Colorado wasn't even Colorado. We are rewinding to territorial law. What stuck? What vanished? And whether the people ever pushed back. Because you can't understand the present without confronting the past. This isn't going to be a modern political fight. We're not starting with headlines. We're starting with original statutes, territorial codes, and court records. And as we go through Colorado's history, if there's a moment, a law, or a year you want us to pause on, let me know. Because before there were states, there were rules imposed on people who couldn't vote against them. Freedom secured, rights defended.